All right, so we have just had our word of prayer, and I have just begun to record. I'm going to be clicking over occasionally and letting new people in as they do come, if that is what ends up happening. I'm going to go ahead and click us onto a larger grid so we can see one another and that kind of thing. And I will go ahead and begin. We are tonight on lesson number 4. We have a total of 7 lessons, so it will be here and gone before you know it. But I encourage you, I know that at times there's going to be ebbs and flows of interest and ebbs and flows of momentum. But I will be honest with you, I really do believe that over the next couple of weeks, there's just a totality and things are beginning to build on one another. And I would just encourage you to not miss and to go ahead and finish what you've begun. These are really, really valuable lessons. I feel, even as a parent whose kids are all gone and have already left the house, I feel to myself that these are things that I probably wish I would have known earlier, but I still can use them even still with my daughters and with my one son-in-law, because these are important principles and they help me to grasp what's going on and hopefully help them and guide them just a little bit better with a little bit more wisdom. Speaking of wisdom, it is the time, the thing that is sweeping the nation. The excitement is palpable. It is time for this edition of Shelley Says, which is a monumental mama moment about practical parental practices. So you say that 3 times fast, and I will give you a Starbucks coffee if you don't screw it up, but I doubt that's actually going to happen. But I will turn it over to the monumental mama, Shelley Nicole. Go right ahead and teach us a little bit this evening from the practical side of things in parenting.
Oh my goodness, I don't know if I can fill those shoes, but so today's tip or word of the night is for me, attitude. We talked a little bit previously about firm and loving boundaries, and tonight really what stuck out to me in the reading this week, chapter 7 and 8, and something that I really focused on when the girls were younger, which meant that I didn't have to focus on it so much when they were older as teenagers, is attitude. And I feel like that it's really important as a parent to tackle the attitude before it becomes an action. So I did that even as young as infant. It sounds extreme, but I believe 100% in it. Even when they were old enough to start, Tatum was asking me, how old were we when you started disciplining us? And I said, as soon as you're old enough to start bowing your back at it as an infant, I was redirecting. Nothing painful, but enough to get their attention. So as young as infant, when they start learning how to kind of buck you and bow their back when they're mad, I would just pop them on the diaper. It wasn't anything that hurt them, but it was enough for them to go, what was that? This action caused a negative reaction, and I don't like that. So even from that age, I was directing them according to their attitude. And so when they became teenagers, we really never had to deal with those typical teenage attitudes, because they knew from a young age we weren't going to tolerate that. And I know it's if you haven't been doing that from the beginning, it might be hard to tackle that later, but it's never too late. I think those lessons that they learn, and he talked about it in the book, you should never see the actions, the disappointing actions of your children to be negative or to be cumbersome, but to be God's grace allowing you the opportunity to redirect them before they leave your house. So it's never too late. So I would just challenge you to start tackling head on those attitudes right now, no matter what age your child is, and help mold those before they leave. Take that opportunity to do it before they leave your house, because whatever attitudes they form now towards leadership in their life, they're going to have that for the rest of their life. So we're going to save them a lot of heartache. It's hard to put in the time on the front end, but it pays dividends on the tail end when they're teenagers and you don't have to deal so much with those type of attitudes, or when they're adults and they're, in jail because they're not respecting the law or the leaders, or when they, get fired because they can't seem to learn under someone that is an authority figure. So, so attitudes, that's my word of the night.
Right. Awesome. Does anybody have any questions that they have for Shelley? Any observations, thoughts, anything that you'd like to throw in or ask a question of Shelley to clarify? Anyone? So you're saying if we don't do what you said to do, we go to jail. Is that what you were saying? I'm just getting some clarity there. I wanted to just make sure. I thought I heard that, but maybe I didn't.
Yes.
Yes, that is
That's
what
I'm saying.
All right. At least for me, anyway. At least for me. Anything that you guys have, any questions, any thoughts? All right. So Shelley, let me ask you a question. Do you remember when you used to tell the girls no, ma'am? When they were
Yes.
when they were very young. Tell what you would do. Like, again, can you give an example of how you would be like, oh, no, ma'am, no, ma'am. Like you used to tell that to the girls all the time. I don't know if you remember that or not, but like as a spectator watching you kind of redirect, that's a good teacher word, by the way, redirect. You redirected the kids all the time by saying, oh, no, no, ma'am, no, ma'am. Do you remember what you used to do that kind of stuff on, or why you used to do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, and I'll speak actually to your word redirect, because I'm actually pretty adamantly against the redirection of things.
Okay.
I feel like you need to tackle it head on. I feel like redirecting is just kind of distracting them from the issue, and although it may help in the moment, it's not gonna address the issue that they're dealing with on a deeper level. So I'm not a fan of the word redirect. I would just make exaggerated motions and wording when they were younger. They do something that was against what I had just told them to do. I would just make a real animated, response, like, oh, no, ma'am, like, make a big deal, and obviously that's when they're little bitty. But just those kind of things to let them catch their attention, like the pop on the diaper. It's a kind of just a shock and an attention getter, like, what's going on here? Let me pay attention to this. And so, I mean, yeah, I did use that a lot, no ma'am, as they were younger, and probably as they grew too. What specifically are you thinking of?
Well, I remember even when they were little bitty babies, and this sounds crazy, but I remember when they were little bitty babies and they'd like start screaming and squalling, like not because they were hurt, but because they were angry. And I literally remember you holding our children and saying, no, ma'am, no, ma'am. We're not going to throw a fit. No, ma'am. Because like literally, as crazy as that sounds, I do believe that you can begin to shape and mold the consciousness of your kids, even as young as in the crib. I know that sounds crazy, but the people that I respect the most as far as learning how to raise kids and stuff like that, my grandmother and my dad and my mom, they swear by that. They still believe that they were teaching us when we were younger, literally in the crib. So I would say it's never too young to start. And I also want to just point something out too, when you're talking about like popping them on the diaper or whatever. Let's be very clear. The point of discipline is never to physically hurt your child. It's to get their attention, right? I mean, if you've never thought about that, let's be very clear. If you're a person who believes in spanking your children, you should never do so in anger. But ultimately, the point is not to inflict physical harm or hurt on them. It's so that you've got their undivided attention. right? And so literally, if you're able to have a baby's undivided attention by, thumping their diaper with your finger, but it makes a pop, they sit up like, what? You've accomplished the point of discipline, right? You've got them paying attention to your agenda and getting off of their own, which I think is, the whole point of what Shelley's kind of saying about attitude and stuff like that. Any thoughts, questions, or comments or anything? I know that's kind of a sensitive subject if you think about it, but I don't know if you guys have any questions or observations or even comments and maybe a story or two that you have. I don't know. Anyone? Is that? I started to say, is that a no, ma'am? But I guess it's not. Go ahead. Go ahead, Teresa.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I remember, I think I agree with Shelley, the attitudes are important. And I remember when Victoria was not small, but medium, I don't know, before she was a teenager, and the time you expect kind of sort of bad attitudes, I noticed that she would, she generally had a pretty good attitude most of the time. And I didn't really like or tolerate any negative attitude, but I don't know. I just noticed that she was having a lot of attitude at some point in time. And when I thought about it and paid attention, it was when she would watch certain things on TV, she would get an attitude. And I just said, you know what? I noticed that when you watch those things, you behave differently, and that's not how we act in this house. And so we're not going to watch those things anymore. So that was just another thing that I did to, it was the things that all her friends were watching, but, I didn't care. I was like, if it's going to change the way you act and behave, then it's something you shouldn't be watching. It wasn't anything, that it was shows that were technically made for her age. And all the kids her age were watching, but I just didn't like how it was, showing up in the household, when she would watch it. So we just stopped it, and she didn't. She watched adult TV with me when it, not adult TV, but like procedural dramas. I like things like that. But she didn't watch those shows that would cause her to act that way until she was able to. I told her, if you're able to watch them and it doesn't impact you, then you can watch them again. But she never really asked again. She just got used to it. She didn't watch that.
Well, at the root of all that is protecting the norms of the house. Like if what they're watching is persuading their norms, then you gotta, like you did, you gotta say, we're not watching that. If their attitudes, of their friends or their own that are creeping in, that are going the wrong direction, if that, you can't let that become the norm. So that's the base of it all, is controlling what's normal and what's allowable in the house.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I'm going to out Shelley on this. She made them stop watching a certain cartoon that was totally for their age group. And I was like, what's up with that? And she goes, well, I don't like that kid. I don't want my kid acting like that kid on TV. And so literally, like, I'm not even going to call it out, because maybe y'all, let your kids watch this show or whatever. That's fine. But she was like, literally, they're not going to talk to me that way, the way that kid in that cartoon talks to his mom. And so
he was a very whiny kid, and she was the queen of redirecting, which is what I don't like. But you probably would know it if I called it out. But he was just a really whiny kid, and I was like, we're not doing that.
It's Caillou. It's Caillou.
I cannot confirm and I cannot deny that it was in fact Caillou, but whatever. But
I was told to speak up, but yes, it was Caillou.
That is so refreshing to hear somebody else recognize that.
Well, but what you reward and what you put up as normal is what your children will begin to gravitate towards. So if you do not put those things up as normal, and if you do not put those things up as aspirational, what you want them to become, then you're asking for their development to go in the wrong direction, because they will begin to display the things that they hear, the things that they see, the thing that they think the kids that their age group or whatever is doing. Well, if you normalize that stuff, then that's the behavior you're going to get. If you don't put the bar any higher, then you will never get a higher standard for your kids or for themselves. They won't want something better for themselves that they can't see or dream of. And so it's really important to choose the right things as far as their entertainment. So good stuff there, ladies. I appreciate it. Any other questions, thoughts, or comments? Anybody else want to jump in and blast Caillou? You can if you choose. I have not confirmed and I have not denied that it was Caillou, but you can jump in and say a few words about the horrible Caillou cartoon if you'd like. That's okay too. Anyone? Anything else? Well, Shelley, thank you so much for Shelley Says, the monumental mama moment about practical parental practices that we are enjoying this evening. So thank you. And every week you're doing a great job. I appreciate it. Y'all don't know, this is not Shelley's favorite thing in the world to do. As much as I love to talk, that's how much she loves not to talk. And so I've basically twisted her arm to get involved, but I knew I could do it because she has so many things about the kids that I think we've seen some of the results come back so positively. And we were intentional about certain things and they've come back with some good fruits. Not saying our kids are perfect by any stretch of the imagination. They're not. Our kids are still failing and still making mistakes. But there were some intentional things that she did that bore some fruit, and we wanted to talk a little bit about some of those, which I think are good and helpful. All right. So we are going to begin this week speaking about the principle number 7, gospel principle of lost. And let's just begin and take off. There's going to be a little bit more discussion tonight than normal. So let's just imagine for a quick moment that you were given some very bad health news, okay? Not a great way to start off, but bear with me. The doctor then says to you, because of this particular disease, we are 100% successful in beating this disease if we choose one path and how we're going to attack it. But we cannot treat both the disease and the symptoms of the disease at the same exact time. So then he looks you in the eye and he says to you, so which one do you want us to treat, the symptom or the disease itself? Which one do you want to treat, the disease itself or the symptoms of this disease? Now, think about that for just a quick second. And you guys tell me what you would say and why you would say it. I'm going to unmute all. There's an unmute all on this button here. Maybe I'm going to unmute all these. Maybe. Anyone? What do you guys say? What would you say to the doctor? What direction would you go?
How bad are these symptoms?
Did you say the symptoms? Oh, did you say how bad are the symptoms? Is that what
How bad are they? No, I'm just kidding. Obviously, you want to heal the disease. I mean, at almost any, you'll deal with any symptom if you know your life's at stake, right? If
Right.
it's that serious.
And let me ask you another question. What happens if you treat the symptoms? Does the disease remain?
Yeah.
What happens if you treat the disease? Do the symptoms go away?
They do, but after the disease is treated, so it's a short-term deal.
So here's the question for us as we begin. Do you think we do a very good job of treating the symptoms or the disease when it comes to our parenting? If the disease is being lost, being a fallen person in a fallen world, a person who has a sinful nature that has to be conquered and brought under submission to Christ and to their parents, do you think we as parents do a very good job of treating the symptom or treating the disease? Do you understand what I'm saying? I think it really is important that we ask this question, because I want to read something that Paul David Tripp wrote in this book. Because of all this chapter being lost has discussed, parenting is not a behavioral control mission. It is a heart rescue mission. The only hope for a lost child is the radical change of heart. Parents are God's tools of change, so we don't settle for the simple announcement of rules, the threat of punishment, and the enforcement of consequences. We're looking for every opportunity to address heart issues in our children, praying that as we do, God will work the change in them that only He can accomplish. So this is my question to you. Reading that right there, do you think we do a good job of differentiating the disease of being lost versus just simply treating the symptoms of being lost as parents? This is kind of a discussion question. So you guys jump in. What do y'all think? Any ideas?
I'll say something. Sorry, I couldn't reach.
No, you're good.
I I'm kind of on the fence, but sometimes I say no because in one of the chapters that he wrote about, like, the little girl was walking off to her bedroom but had a really bad attitude about it, and they called her back and said, you need to have a better attitude. Yes, she was doing what she was supposed to, but a lot of times you say you don't call them back and have that conversation. You do it because I said, and do it with less attitude. And so then I think, yeah, well, I should make a better effort of, why we should have a better heart about that and not just do it because I say kind of situation. You should explain that you do it because it's the right thing to do and have a grateful heart and, a better heart about it, not just a bad attitude.
Yeah. Well, honestly, Leisha, I think that is true of so many people. I think we think that this is the idea of what good parenting looks like. We announce the rules, we tell them what the punishment will be, and then we enforce the consequences. That's good parenting. And it's like, if you're talking about on the basest level, maybe that's good parenting to a certain degree. But if you're not dealing with the whole and the totality of it, I don't know if you guys remember, I talked about in the very beginning, and I talked about in the message about fearless parenting, the idea of your kids doing what is right, even when you're not around to police them. You can't tell your kids, do it because I said so, do it because I said so, do it because I said so, and then when you're not around to say so, to expect them to do it. I mean, just do the math, right? If you're not there anymore to do it because I said so, then they don't know how to make the right decisions for the right reasons. They don't know how to say, you know what? I don't want to be that kind of person, so I won't do this. If you can't instill something to aspire to in your kids, and it's hard, Alicia, it's dead on. You're right. We sometimes as parents are so busy treating the symptom that we've never even discussed the disease with our kids. And those are hard conversations. It's not easy. I'm going to tell you, I've looked every single one of my daughters in the eye and told them what their problem is. I know that sounds crazy. And I know that sounds like I'm a horrible father. But I literally have looked every one of my daughters in the eye and said, this is your biggest challenge because you don't like to do this, but until you learn how to do this, you will not be the person that you're supposed to be. I've looked every single one of my daughters in the eye and told them what their biggest obstacle is to overcome. You know how I know? Because I live with them 24/7 for the first 20 years of their life. I know that most of those problems that they've had since they were 1 year old. It's the truth. And if you've got kids, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You probably know the biggest challenge that your kid will face and what their biggest issue and obstacle is. But I don't know if you've ever had that discussion with them. But that's how you reach their heart. Because in their heart of hearts, they know it too, right? I mean, if you told me, Randy, this is your biggest issue, you know what? I already know you're right. So here's the problem. For most of us as parents, we think that's good parenting, but it's not. Looking every one of your kids in the eye and telling them what their biggest problem or challenge is not good parenting. This is what your biggest problem is. We're praying about it, and we're helping you to go in a different direction and how to overcome this. We're going to do this together. And this is where parenting shifts. where you reach the heart of your child, where they say, mom's here for me, dad's here for me. They want me to be the very best that I can be. They trust me enough to have a conversation, not just simply do it because I said so, do it because I said so. And this is where you begin to reach the heart of your child, but you also point them towards the fact that they need to change. They need a savior. And that's really, really important and valuable. And if you haven't ever done that, you're not really parenting. You're just doing the attitude control. You're not dealing with the disease. You're dealing with the symptoms. And it's a lot easier to deal with the symptoms than it is to deal with the disease. But the problem is that you can treat the symptoms forever and never touch the disease. And your children are with you for a finite amount of time. And they will leave, and your influence will diminish and lessen in many ways because you won't be there with them moment by moment, minute by minute, every day. Well, now what? Is it easier or harder for them to address that issue? Is it easier or harder for them to overcome that issue that you've been dealing with them for a long time on? It's important to kind of tackle it now while you've got the opportunity. Very quickly, this is the quick review from last week. 3 mindsets that a parent needs to develop. You got to deal a process-oriented mentality. That means I don't have to be perfect in the moment. It also is an unending conversation. And it is a project mentality where you take your opportunities, you address your child's weaknesses and issues, but you also praise like crazy any progress that you see in that kid going towards the things that you guys have been working on together. Hey, you know what? I asked you not to backtalk. I asked you not to have a bad attitude. You dealt with that just now. This a week ago, a month ago, you would have been yelling and screaming or throwing a fit. And look at you. You were doing the right thing. Like, this is how you tell them you're doing the right thing and you're going in a good direction, and you help them to be inspired to be better. I don't know. I've said a ton here. So let me just stop and ask you guys, y'all have any input, any thoughts, any conversation about that idea? Anyone?
I think a lot of times we underestimate what a child can understand. And I think I mentioned this before, when the kids were little, we'd make our one outing for the week and go to Walmart, and it was a big deal. We could get groceries and toiletries and all that stuff, and toting 3 kids, it's a big deal, to go in there with small kids. And I would just talk to them even as they were teeny tiny, we're not going to ask for things, we're going to just kind of laid out the expectations. And surprisingly, they listened. And I think sometimes we assume our kids at whatever age are too young to really understand. But when we lay it out for them, they not only learn better conversational skills, but more empathy. And I'll use that like a mask illustration because it's relevant, not because I'm trying to make a statement, but you tell your kids to wear their mask, wear your mask. And the minute they're away from you, they're going to take their mask off. But if you say, hey, this is for others, others, we don't want to get someone else sick, so let's wear our masks so we don't get this old lady next to us sick, kind of thing. Then they start processing, well, yeah, what I do does, directly affect other people. So, just talk to them, whatever age, whatever you think they can't understand, take it a step further and you'd be surprised.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And actually, it really goes right into exactly what he mentions. And if you guys want to jump in here in a minute, that's great. I'm going to keep moving. He says that there are 2 dangerous lies that every kid believes. It is the lie of autonomy and the lie of self-sufficiency. And the lie of autonomy is exactly what Shelley just spoke about. What I choose to do only affects me. Therefore, it's my decision, it's my choice, and I'm going to fight against you if you act like I am affecting other people. So it doesn't matter what I want to eat and what I don't want to eat. It doesn't matter what I wear and what I don't want to wear. It doesn't matter how I speak to others. They'll get over it. It doesn't matter if I help with the chores. That's not my deal. That's yours. You want those things done. I don't want those things done. You're not going to tell me when to go to bed. You're not going to tell me when to get up. You're not going to tell me when I have to come home. The curfew is ridiculous, like, so all of these things are examples of how a child or a teenager or a tween or anywhere in between says, I think I am old enough, smart enough, wise enough, grown enough to make my own decisions. And besides, they only affect me. Now, think about that for just a moment. Our whole world is becoming more childish, if you really think about it. The concept of what I do only affects me, and so you don't tell me what to do, what I do only affects me, is getting more and more and more and more traction every single day. And that's why our world is going in a bad direction. Because if we are at the center of our own world and nobody else is nearly as important as what I want for me for right now, then we're going down a road that is a real problem for us in the long run. I don't know if you guys know this, and this is not a political statement, but right now, over 52% of the people in our country receive from the government. Now, I don't know if you know that or not, but let me just kind of make you aware. 52% is now more than the people that are paying in. So 48% are doing part of the paying and 52% are receiving. In the long run, that is not sustainable. Okay, so that's not a political statement. That's just a statement of fact. Ultimately, if you constantly take and never are participating in the give, you can't sustain a life. It's just, it implodes. And so if you think about that for a child and how that fits in a child's situation, if they are constantly saying, it's for me, it's for me, it's for me, and they never are made to give up and give out, then they have become like the black hole that sucks all the joy and fun and all of the, good out of a family unit, because they are constantly taking and never giving, right? So there are children that believe that they are autonomous and have never been dissuaded from that. They've never been confronted from that from their parents. And that's not the child's fault. Every child comes into the world thinking they're the center of attention. It's our job as parents to tell our children it's not all about you. It's about other people. And if they haven't learned that, then that's a failing of parenting, not a failure of the child's nature, because every child's nature is the same. Sorry, that's the reality. And so we as parents have to be real serious about treating that disease, not just dealing with the symptoms. Does that make sense? So I see a few head shakes, so I'm going to keep moving. All right. Anyone have anything that they'd like to say, feel free to jump in. I'm going to keep moving, and I'll let you unmute, and you can get my attention. The second lie is the lie of self-sufficiency. I don't need anyone to tell me what to do or how to do it. I'm going to push back against anyone that I feel is telling me what I think is a conflict of my own wants. And so that's why your child will tell you what to eat, what to wear, how to speak. All those things are their decision. And you know what? I don't need your help. Well, who do you think puts clothes on your back, you little punk? That's the good parenting way to speak to your child, by the way. Little punk, who do you think pays for your haircut? Who do you think pays for your toothpaste and toothbrush and all that stuff? Like, you're the one who pays for all that stuff. I don't need you. I don't need you. It's like, well, yeah, you're sleeping in my house. You're sucking up my AC, like you're eating my food. But they'll tell you, I don't need you. It's like, yeah, everything that you have in your possession, everything that brings you joy, like your video games and your phone and all of this stuff, it's all there because I put it there. And yet they'll tell you with a straight face that they don't need you anymore, right? This is why parents need to make sure that they are aware that their children are hopelessly and helplessly lost. Seriously. If your 4-year-old thinks that they can beat you up, even though you outweigh them by 120 pounds, and you outsize them by 3.5 foot, that child is lost, right? They need help. They're swinging on you, at your knees, because they literally think they can beat you up and beat you into submission. Well, that just proves how dysfunctionally lost their mind is. Some really good stuff in Paul David Tripp's book, but just help them to understand that they're not self-sufficient, that they need other people. And even if they don't think that they need you in that moment, they will eventually need someone in their life. It's important. Very quickly, let's talk about this. In the concept of being lost, the lost coin, the lost sheep, and the lost son make up Luke chapter 15. It's 3 parables back to back to back. And in the one about the lost son, it's also called the parable of the prodigal son. And if you read the parable of the prodigal son, there are a few main characters. And one of the main characters is the father who's waiting on the son who left home with his fortune to come back. Now, here's the question. Who does the father in the parable of the lost son represent? This is not a trick question, but just let me ask you that question. Who does the father in the parable of the lost son represent in that parable? Not a trick question.
God.
Yes, it's God the Father.
Yes.
And so if that is true, as we read this parable, I want you to think about the concept of lost. I want you to think about the concept of thinking autonomous and self-sufficient. I want you to think about how the parent responds to the child, how God, the figure of God, responds to this child. In Luke chapter 15, verse 11, Jesus continues and says, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. Dad, I don't need you anymore. I just need what's coming to me. So give me my money. We'll part ways. So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together everything he had and set off for a distant country. And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country. He began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but still no one gave him anything. But when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, I'm starving to death. So I'm going to set out, I'm going to go back to my father, and I'm going to say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven, and I've sinned against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Instead, just make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up, and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him and ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father basically interrupts and says to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and let's celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive. He was lost and now he is found. So they began to celebrate. Look back at the lie of autonomy. Did you see it in the parable? I'm making my own decisions. What I do doesn't hurt anybody but me. Give me what's mine. And then the father's fortune was gone. Right? The lie of self-sufficiency. I don't need you, Dad. I don't need you, brother. I don't need you, family. I'm just leaving. I'm going to go to another country. I'm going to sow my wild oats. I'm going to live it up and live the high life. But then suddenly came to the end of himself and the end of his money. That was the end of his friends, right? Needless to say. And so all of these things are all happening, but you can see the dangerous lies that every kid believes, but this one had never been persuaded to think any different. You guys understand? So here's the question. What do you think that the lost son learned from being gone? This is a question for your input. So you guys jump in here. Somebody go ahead and unmute yourself and tell me, what is it that you think that the lost son learned while he was gone? Practical. Doesn't have to be biblical. Just what do you think?
He's not so hot on his own.
He's not so hot on his own. Very good. Very true. What else?
I think he also learned that that kind of high life don't last too long either.
Yeah, the high life doesn't last too long.
Money, and no matter how much money that you have, sometimes that don't mean that you'll be happy, or you know that it's gonna give you everything that you want.
Yeah, in the immortal,
like the love of God and the love of His Father.
Yeah, the immortal words: money can buy a lot of things, but money can't buy me love. Right?
Can't buy love.
What else? What else do you think that the prodigal learned?
Yeah, I imagine he learned, life lessons like people probably taking advantage of him. He was probably naive and thought that he could trust people and, that were not his family.
Yeah. And I also think he learned that he had it a whole lot better than he ever realized when he was actually at home. Right? I mean, the grass is always greener on the other side, and he learned, you know what? It's better to be a hired servant than where I'm at right now in my Father's house, So I think he learned that discipline is more important than he thought. I think he learned life is harder than he thought. And I think he learned that resources are in shorter supply than he thought. And here's the question. Think about this. Resources are in shorter supply, that there's less time than you think, and there's more needed than you thought. There's opportunity that will come and that will go and may go and never ever return. That maybe you have more gaps in your intelligence than you thought, and maybe dad had a little more intelligence than you ever gave him credit for. That money can fly away very quickly, how it's sometimes really difficult to earn, even though dad made it look very easy, how it can buy you some things and how it can't buy you other things. Now, let me ask you this question. Doesn't this sound a lot like some of the things that you're probably trying to teach some of your kids right now? How to seize some of these opportunities, how to deal with their money, how to figure out time management and what that looks like, how they better take advantage of a certain opportunity because they may never get another opportunity like this one ever again, right? And how they need to get a grasp on the value of money and things like that. And you probably said, well, money doesn't just go on trees. And, you got to be very careful because sometimes your kids, they see that you spend money the way that you spend money. They don't even see the way that it goes in to earning it and what it takes and all that stuff. And so there's a lot of things that you're going to be teaching your kids all of their life, literally all of their life. So here's what I want to kind of say. The prodigal is obviously old enough to be out on his own. He had to learn all of these lessons, right? So don't get mad at your kids if you're still teaching them some of these same lessons. Same ones that you've been teaching them for a long time. Same ones that you're kind of dealing with for over and over and over again. Why? Because even the prodigal who left the house of the father, was still learning some of these difficult lessons. A lot of them don't get learned quickly, and repetition is the key to learning. You've probably never heard me say that, but it's true. Repetition is actually the key to learning. You guys know what the key to learning is? It's repetition. It's true. It's true. I want to say it one more time, but I'm not. I'm going to keep going. All right, here we go. So what characteristics do you see in the father in Christ's story of the lost or prodigal son? Let's talk about the parent in this story who is patterned after God himself. What do you see of him that you admire? What do you see? Yeah, that means y'all got to unmute. So go ahead, jump in there. Somebody jump in and help me out.
He had that undying love for him, like God has for us. No matter.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And no matter the mistakes that we make, and even though if we might be hard on ourselves, we know that God is gonna forgive us. I mean, not to do it over and over again, but at least He's a forgiving God. So
yeah, Thank
That
goodness.
love is always there.
God is that, right?
It's unconditional love. It's the epitome of unconditional love. That's, you're here and I love you, and then nothing will change that.
How powerful would those words be to your kids? How powerful would that be to you, for you to say that to your son or to your daughter, especially in the moment that they are crying, upset, and saying, I don't have my life together. I'm not as grown up as I thought I was, or I screwed up, or, when they're young, they can't quite verbalize it, but they're laying there on the ground, crying, sobbing, sitting in the middle of the room and just like broken. For you to come to them and say, you know what, you are my son, you are my daughter, I love you, never going to change. I know you're frustrated with you right now, and we'll work on that, but you belong right here with me, and I am proud of you. I'm, the one who loves you. It doesn't change anything just because you have to learn this lesson. I had to learn it. Your mom had to learn it, or vice versa. Your dad had to learn it. This is where you identify with them, and this is where you open the heart of your child to hear when they know that they've come to the end of themselves, and you love them, you affirm them, you run to them, you embrace them. And instead of saying, see, I told you, you're a terrible kid, you shouldn't have done that, that's a really, really bad mistake. No, you don't do that. You never pretend that it's okay, but you also make sure that you say, we'll figure the rest out later, but I'm just glad that we're here in this moment, that I'm here with you, that you don't have to be alone, because I would hate to think about you just sitting here crying and getting so low on yourself. I want you to know I'm glad I'm here because I know you and I love you, period. End of discussion. We'll figure the rest out later. And so those are the kinds of things that you can capture the heart of your child, and you can lead them out of that position and condition of being lost and lead them to the one who can bring them out. And that's how you do it. And that's when you do it. I think that's important. All right. Quick pause for questions or comments, and we're going to keep moving because we're going to talk about authority and definitely be done on time as best we possibly can. Anyone? All right. Well, I do appreciate y'all's input for sure, and I value that. Very quickly, let's go on to the principle of authority, gospel principle number 8. And here's the question. If you had to just say, now I'm gonna preface this. Leave your mute button on, because I don't want you to actually say the word. I don't want you to actually say the name. But I want you to say, okay, if I actually had to unmute myself and say it out loud, you had to just say one name. Who is it that sets the tone of the day in your home? In other words, who is it in your home that chooses whether everyone in the home has a good day or has a bad day? If that person struggles, everyone's likely to struggle. If that person's angry, everybody's going to be on pins and needles. Who is that person in your home? What name is that? Don't have to unmute. Don't unmute, and you don't have to say. But here's the thing. If that's your child, especially if they're young, you got to be very, very careful, because that person is setting the agenda and tone of your home. And they're making the decisions from an immature place for everyone in many ways. And so if you have not allowed them to see that they are under your authority and ultimately under God's authority, they may think they're the one who gets to set the tone and the agenda in the home. And if I don't like it, I'm going to throw a fit big enough for everybody to wish they had said yes when I said this is what I want to happen. All right? If that's going on in your home, you need to make sure that you do not let the authority of your home get twisted and turned upside down. It's easy to do because there are strong personalities for your kids. Your kids are dealing with emotions that are turned up to 10. Not because they're bad kids, not because they're hateful kids, not because they're mean kids, but because they're kids, period. And kids don't know how to regulate their emotions. They can't stop when they get rolling and angry. They can't settle down the way that they're supposed to. They can't realize they're wrong the way that they're supposed to. So these are the things that happen because you're dealing with kids. But if you put them in a position where they have the authority in your home, they get triggered about something, everybody's day gets shot because of a 4-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 24-year-old, right? I think I hit almost everybody that's here with one of those ages, right? And so, like, it happens. I promise you. We've had the discussion of saying, you know what? We can't let that run our household and that change everybody else's day in our situation. It's the way that it is. Why? Because kids aren't designed for that. And if you let them, they will take control, but they are not learning what authority is. And by the way, it just gets more painful. Not just for you dealing with them, but for them dealing with authority. Because if they don't learn to respect your authority, they will probably learn to respect a teacher's authority. And if they don't learn to respect a teacher's authority, they will probably learn how to respect a police officer's authority, or worse, or respect the authority of a bully who doesn't have any sympathy and won't let up. Like, there's a lot of things that will teach them how to submit in this world. And you are by far the softest and the gentlest and the best, because you're always going to have them as a part of your life. Teach them how to submit to authority for your own sake. And by, everything that is sacred, they need to know it. Because the truth of the matter is that if they don't want to submit to your authority and they never learn how to do that, if they think they are the center of the universe, guess who can't ever be the center of their universe? God. Guess who will never be over them? God. Not really. They might give him lip service, but if he's going to be real in their lives, he will be the authority. And if he's not going to be the authority, then he can't really be real in their lives. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying. And so you are preparing your kids to respect authority. It's so important because it flows all the way to God and their relationship with them. And by the way, if they think that they run the house at your house, wait till they get their own house. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a problem. All right. I said a lot. I don't know if you guys have any questions or thoughts or comments about that. But if you do, jump in, please. Anyone? I'm going to say this. Make sure that you're very clear that your children don't automatically know what obedience to authority looks like. That's important because you might want to say, well, you know how to do this, or you know what to do, or you know how to act, and you're not acting right. There's a passage of scripture in Ephesians 6 that says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with the promise that it would go well with you, that you may enjoy long life on the earth. That hasn't changed. And then it goes to this, and it says, father or parents, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. How exasperating is it for a child to be told that they're not being a good kid, but they have no idea what being a good kid actually looks like? Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? Because if you haven't ever told them what a good kid looks like, they're flailing around in the dark, because they probably want to about half the time be a good kid. About half the time they don't. That's just reality, right? But the question here is, if you haven't told them what a good kid looks like, why aren't you exasperating that kid in your mind? I mean, because that's what you're doing. If you haven't told them, look, this is what I expect, and this is where you're not hitting the mark, it's going to be very hard for your child to understand or respect authority. And you guys have all had bosses, right? Where you knew you weren't hitting the mark, but they wouldn't tell you what you were doing wrong. Incredibly difficult, incredibly frustrating. And you probably eventually wanted to get out of there and into a better situation where the communication was more open. Stop for just a second, and all that stuff that I just said sounds a lot like a lot of teenagers saying, I can't wait to get out of house because I wanted this and I want that and I want these things to be different, and they're just not ever going to change at my house, right? So it's incredibly important for us to say, you know what? They're kids. Shouldn't their parents have taught them what it looks like to be a good kid? Yeah, that's your job, right? That's my job. If I don't tell them what a good kid acts like, and if I don't tell them what a bad kid does so they can have the standard, then that's on me, not on them. Very quickly, it's up to us to spell it out, teach them, and to remind them as often as necessary. And by the way, be very careful what you're teaching them with your actions. Sometimes things that you don't want to teach them, like that whole thing, I'm going to count to 3. 1, 2, 2.5. I'm really serious this time. You better do it. I really mean it. Well, you know what? They already know. They know that they've got till 2.5 to get the things done that you want. And you're frustrated, and they're cool with it because they think, hey, I got in under the 3. I knew mom was going to go to 2.5. I knew dad was going to say 2.5 because he really didn't want to say anything more. So you're teaching them to be a child that doesn't obey immediately. But you know what? When you tell them, hey, this is what a good kid does. A good kid doesn't have to be told 4 times to go and clean up his room. They do it when they're told. You know, that's what a good kid does. Like, what am I asking of you? What am I demanding of you? Look, I understand you might have forgot once, but second time, it's too much. The third time, way too much. The 4th time, it's just rebellion. So don't tell me that you forgot. No, I've told you 4 different times. You've just chosen not to do it. So a good kid doesn't choose to not do what his parents or parents of her say to do. Very quickly, punish the attitude as well as the action. I will tell you, Alicia mentioned a great story in this book here where he says, basically, there's a little girl that's told to go and pick up her toys. And so she walks down the hall screaming and yelling back at the mom about how she hates this house and how she hates that she has to go and pick up the toys and all that stuff. And he says, if you don't call your child back and say, come back here, we're going to have a discussion about your attitude right now, then you've done your child a disservice because they have done the action, but they've got a horrible attitude. And he said, true obedience always begins with the heart. And let me just tell you something. If your kid is constantly back-talking you, constantly back and forth with you, constantly telling you that they know better than you, then this place of authority is something that they haven't grasped yet that is yours and not theirs. So this is very, very important that they learn this lesson. And this brings me to a statement he says, if your eyes ever see or your ears ever hear the sin, weakness, and failure of your children, it's never an accident. It's never a hassle. It's always grace. God has put them into a family of faith so that you and I can be tools of their rescue and their transformation. So it's not a problem. It's not a headache. It's not a hassle. It's an opportunity. And if you look at it in that way, it can change your life and change your children. Very quickly, we talked about the parental wants. We want them to love well. We want them to come home even when they don't have to. We want them to make choices even when we're not around to tell them what to do. And we want them to reach their potential. The only way that you can do that is if you deal with the fact that they are lost and helplessly, hopelessly lost without God to save them. And the authority that you have in the home to direct and teach them, if you can teach them those 2 things, you will begin to see changes where their attitude changes, where their choices are made for the right reasons, not just simply because you're standing over them and making sure that they make them. It's incredibly important. And very quickly, I'm just going to go here. Here's the homework. You read the next 2 chapters. That's 7 and 8 or 9 and 10, just depending on if you're reading back or reading forward, just depending. But very quickly, here's your big takeaway. I'm going to talk about this quite a bit. The keystone habit of families is when you daily have these little soul-shaping moments where you do that at the dinner table. And I think it's so important and so valuable. So when you say to your child, come down and eat, I don't want to eat. No, 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 no. That's not what we do. In this house, we get together. We're going to eat. I don't want to eat that. Can you make me something else? No, not doing that. You know why? Hey, look, this isn't about this or this isn't about that. And you know what? We're going to eat together, and you display that authority. You tell them to come and sit down. No, leave your phone over there. Phone doesn't make it to the dinner table. We sit down as a family. We do these things together. We pay attention to each other. We reconnect. And day by day by day, small amounts of authority are taken. Small amounts of bonds of love are sewn together. Small amounts of interest and understanding are developed between you and your kids and vice versa. And you leave with them in a different place day by day by day. This is not something that will change your kid from a juvenile delinquent today to being an angel and a straight A student tomorrow. It's not going to happen. Sorry. But what it will do is if your child is struggling to find themselves and struggling to connect with you and others, you begin it now. And I promise you, in a few months, you'll notice some changes. In 6 months, you'll notice a lot of changes. In a year, you'll notice dramatic changes. That's what I believe. I really do believe that. So this is your big takeaway. You make sure that you're doing some of these things that put you in front of your children, put you in a connection place with your kids on a daily basis. That means you taking the time. That means you sacrificing things that you have to sacrifice. It means watching your show on DVR at 10:30 after they've gone to bed instead of at 6:30 when they're right there and they want to talk. So that kind of stuff happens, but it's decisions. And I promise you this, best decision I ever made in my life was to buy a DVR for myself. So every time my kids wanted my attention, click the button and they had my attention. It's the best decision I ever made. Well, I mean, maybe the Lord, accepting the Lord, that's probably better. Marrying my wife, that's probably, all right. So it's in the top 5 or 10 at least, but let me just say that. All right. So these are the things that you choose to do to make your life with your children the best that it possibly can be. All right. I've said a lot. We tried to rush through because we kind of camped down on some of the things earlier on in the time, but hopefully you found this to be rewarding, understanding a little bit more as we leave today. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, or comments before we leave? I'll give you one chance to have the last word if anybody's got something that they'd like to share. Anyone? Okay, well, if not, I hope that you have enjoyed our time together. I hope that you will be back for the next 3 weeks. We'll be covering even more ground, and hopefully this will help you. I'm just going to say a quick prayer and we'll be done. Heavenly Father, may you bless each and every parent and each and every child that is a part of your family, God. May we as parents develop them to love you first and foremost. And Lord, may they develop themselves and desire that development that you've provided for them through parenting and the love and the bonds of family. Just guide and direct our paths, strengthen our homes, we pray. And thank you for this time around your word and the example of you as the Father who waits for those that he loves. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right, guys. Thank you so much. God bless you guys. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you on Sunday. If not before, we'll see you coming up very soon. Y'all take care. God bless.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye.